Welcome, welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today. My name is Sylvia Ortegon. I am Senior Vice President Marketing at Hotwire Global. And today I am really, really thrilled to be joined by a fantastic group of leaders. If you don't mind me sharing my screen, I am going to introduce you. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. So today we have joining us, we have Sam Zupan, VP Corporate Communications at Indeed. We have Till Grush, co-founder and co-CEO of the House of Beautiful Business. He is our partner, and he is one of the brilliant minds behind the findings and the research we're going to share today. We have also joining us Amanda Coffey. She is communications consultant at Coffee Communications, and I'm sure most of you in this room know her already. And then last but not least, we were joined by Grant Tubes. He's our global CEO at Hotwire. So thank you so much for joining us. And a few things for housekeeping before we move forward. You'll notice that this is an open mic space. We'll leave time for questions, for reflections as the panel ends. But if you rather write your questions, you can use the chat in the meeting, and we'll be super happy to pick those up and discuss live. So with that, we're going to start, and I'm going to pass it on to Till to kick us off. Thank you, Till.
Thank you so much, Sylvia, and hi, everybody. Super happy to be here and to speak about this report that the House of Beautiful Business, in partnership with Hotwire and our iDNA, published a few weeks back at the beginning of the year. It's called Agentic Organizations, as you already saw, and in the next couple of minutes, Sylvia and I will present you the thinking and findings of this report that, of course, you should absolutely download and read word by word, page by page. So the story of this report really starts in 1979, when in the IBM training manual, this sentence was written: a computer can never be held accountable, therefore a computer must never make a management decision. Fast forward to the spring of last year. Next slide, Sylvia, please. Where a group of researchers published a widely cited scenario called AI 2027, also available online. Many of these researchers had worked before at OpenAI, and it essentially describes the global race towards artificial superintelligence that has a transformative, of course, highly transformative power for business, economy, society at large. Within just a few years. Now, the researchers said a while after, it's probably like, not kind of that timeline exactly, but whatever way you count it, we're already in the midst of agentic AI being here with real deployment. And I think you can read the studies of the likes of McKinsey, for example, that describe this on the positive side, yet also on the fact that reality often still proves quite difficult. And this is likely something that at much lower scale, of course, all of you probably also experience, getting more and more into specific agentic workflows in your use with artificial intelligence, being fascinated by what works, but also feeling still the limitations. And no matter whether you're leaning more on the optimistic side or more on the cautious side here, if you zoom out, the point that we took as the starting point for our exploration was this: the next decade will not just have a massive transformation of productivity in organizations. It will shift the idea of agency, the capacity to act and influence outcomes across really every layer of organizations and society. So with that hypothesis, we started and looked into what we're calling the rise of agentic organizations. And we wanted to describe in this report two key perspectives. One being an insight perspective of how agentic organizations are actually reshaped inside the enterprise, their teams, the workflows. but also outside in the marketplace, in their relation to consumers, in their go-to-market. Those are the two main perspectives that we wanted to build. And we did so by doing several research activities. First of all, we conducted a bunch of in-depth interviews with expert psychologists, organizational design experts, behavioral science experts, of course, AI practitioners. We tried to a different form of dialogue by instigating a written dialogue between one of the innovators within Hotwire's Doors Anol is his name. He leads so yeah, what does he lead? He leads
the AI lab and the innovation
AI
group.
lab, exactly. And a cyber psychologist, and their back and forth is also published on our Substack at the House of Beautiful Business. You can read it in full, and parts of it are what formed the character of this report. Then we hosted a virtual community event, convening practitioners such as today, discussing early findings, and maybe kind of most importantly, we also conducted a survey. That was a global survey of 900 professionals across the US, Europe, and Singapore. So with these insights, let us dive into the inside perspective of the organizations as the first lens, and then we'll talk about the outside lens afterwards. What we found inside the organization is right now really an empowerment paradox. Because of course, AI agents do empower people, but at the same time, there is a genuine sense that they're also competing with people. 69% of the people we surveyed said they feel more empowered. And at the same time, 56% said they believe AI could do most or all of their job in 5 years. Now, that, of course, creates an interesting dynamic where AI really is entering the workforce almost as a teammate or as a peer, or maybe also as a superior or supportive person to the people who work here. And this is quite interesting because we asked people in more detail around how respondents view AI. And this audience of 900 people, I should say, was filtered by the fact that all of them actively work with AI in their day-to-day job. 21% said AI feels like a colleague. 14% AI feels like a decision maker. The rest is what you would expect. AI feels like a tool. But this really means that over a third of the people we surveyed had a feeling that AI was more than that, more than just a tool. There was a high openness for virtual employees handling routine tasks that we found. But what maybe was most surprising to us is that there was also a really high comfort level of people we surveyed with being managed by an AI. So having an AI assign tasks and review performance was something that 43% of the people we surveyed said yes, and 27 considered as maybe. Just 30% said flat out no way. And what this, of course, means is that we already are in the midst of an evolution that we are describing in the report across 3 phases. We're calling them here assist, share, and autonomy. Assist, the phase when AI extends human work. That is pretty much a lived reality that all of us know already. A reality where humans stay firmly in control. The next phase, share, also, as the research shows, already a reality, at least partly in organizations. Semi-autonomous action appears. Humans move more from doing the work towards designing how the work is done. And then autonomy, of course, that future state that in many ways we felt in interviews is hard for people to imagine, where AI acts independently, owns outcomes, and humans really just, if at all, supervise. The challenge in this transition across the 3 phases is, quite bluntly speaking, what our community member at the House of Beautiful Business, Helen Edwards, an AI researcher, framed into this quote: "The frontier runs on software time while the transition runs on human time." Getting the culture inside of organizations, getting the work processes, the self-understanding of people to match the technical capability out there is quite certainly outrunning institutional readiness in almost all cases. And the job of leaders really is, from an inside perspective, aligning those two timelines and those two time senses that we are experiencing. And maybe just to leave you with one very particular finding also from this insight perspective here. Yes, please change, Sylvia. Next slide. We found a really concerning gap between seniors and juniors in the data from the survey. Because 76% of executive staff felt empowered, while only 43% of the junior staff said the same. And this difference in perception of AI, you find that in almost every parameter that we surveyed. Many more executives felt more creative than the junior staff. Many more of the executive staff also had a higher willingness to accept an AI manager than the lower ranked staff. And this is maybe the one single biggest design challenge, next slide, Sylvia, maybe that I want to leave you with here. The real design challenge for agentic organizations inside the enterprise is how do you stop AI-driven power from flowing upwards, while those lower down lose both voice and agency. With that, I think we're transitioning over to the outside perspective, which is the second half of this report. Sylvia, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. So still mentioned, we looked at the research from agentic organizations, not only inside the companies, but outside in the marketplace. Because of course, we all know that AI is already part of how people make decisions as consumers. So from our research, 82% said that they rely on AI tools sometimes for choices like shopping, travel, entertainment. Well, nearly a third say they would trust an AI assistant to make purchases on their behalf without checking every step, right? So this means now that we've been talking about geo and we've been talking about being visible on AI, but really like making our brand and our content visible to machines isn't optional. If we're not legible, we're not credible and cited by machines, we're going to get filtered out way faster than we think. And that's, should truly become a priority for organizations. And I'm trying to click next. Yes. So becoming visible isn't just about consumers finding our brands on AI. It's about how our stories and our signals and credibility are being interpreted on our behalf. So for this, it helps for us to we're looking at how AI engages with brands across the decision journey, evolving in three phases. The first one is answer. We're very familiar with it. Is when AI summarizes brand information in response to queries. Then we have recommend, when AI evaluates options and steers consumer choice. And then act is when AI executes transactions autonomously on users' behalf. So we basically have no human intervention in that phase. And I am going to just deep dive real quickly in all of these three stages, because this is one of the first shifts as to how a brand now is experienced. If AI becomes your brand's new display case, right? Digital first touch point, then brands stop being experienced like an emotional total brand, and they start being summarized. So if you think about that, the identity shifts from a narrative to really a descriptor. So emotion gets almost compressed into attributes rather than a felt experience, right? So the consequence here is that this emotional connection of brands shrinks at the point of first digital contact. So this is where communications becomes really important. If AI is compressing our story into summaries, then the quality and the consistency of our signals becomes really important, and where geo really starts to matter even more. In our survey, 60% of the companies say that they actively monitor how AI agents describe their brand, and 78% said that they feel at least somewhat confident that those summaries are accurate. But really, accuracy is not the same as distinctiveness. One of our report contributors, Chris Rothwell, she put it really clearly. She said that, we need to make sure that we don't train the distinctiveness out of our own voice, right? We can we can fall for that if we just keep on like being like, oh yeah, I'm sure if it's correct. It's like, it's more about, the job that we have as comms leaders and marketing leaders is to make sure that we don't train that distinctiveness out of our own voice. The second stage is recommend, and this is where AI qualifies for selection. So then brands at this stage really operate at a more logic-driven environment. So if AI is evaluating customer satisfaction, performance benchmarks, consistency, third-party reviews, if you think about that, brand nostalgia or emotional storytelling or creative campaigns, not so much. That's not so much what's evaluated. So what's happening is that as answer and recommend and act or buy begin to merge into one interface, then this traditional marketing funnel as we know it starts collapsing, or it starts like increasingly being owned by AI systems. Then the third stage is, well, if answer, recommend, and buy are collapsing almost into this one interface, then we really need to start thinking about how to design for agent experience. And I was talking to Grant the other day about AI as an audience, right? We talk about customer experience. So we need to start talking about agent experience, right? So how easily can an agent interact with your systems, complete a transaction, receive confirmations without friction? Because this is critical, because AI learns from interaction, right? And it learns from what we feed it. So if an agent struggles to work with our systems, or the data is poor, or the experience is poor, then unlike humans, AI doesn't forget, right? So this is where we need to start thinking about agentic experience in a more deep way. So just to close it out and pass it on to Grant, we close it with like, well, will then brands matter more or less in the future? And we really believe it's both. Like, emotion does not disappear. We're still humans, right? We need a human world outside of machines as well. But it's going to get almost displaced upward and downward. So if you think about the experience before machine interface, and this emotional connection and brand experience happens at a cultural relevance, like communities, earned media, human interaction. So it's more about moments than messages. Then after machine interface, we keep on building this identity through product experience, rituals, loyalty, and advocacy. And then, of course, we have moments of exception, and we communicators are very much aware of that. Crisis, ethical ambiguity, high stakes decisions. So that's where also storytelling matters more than ever. So if you think about this construct of before machine interface, then the GEO and the whole machine experience that we are creating, and then after the machine experience is how then that way we're gonna experience brands more succinctly. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing some of the insights from the report. You have the QR code here. You can download the report. We are going to send it to you as well. So if you don't worry, we're going to do it. And I am going to stop sharing to pass it on to Grant to open the panel with Sam and Till and Amanda.
Thank you so much, Sylvia. Thank you, Till. That was really, really helpful, really great, and I think sets the stage for the conversation that we're hoping to have. So I will welcome Amanda and Till and Sam back on camera. I think there we go. I see everybody. Fantastic. Thank you all so much for joining us. What we thought we'd do for the next, let's say, 20 minutes, 30 minutes or so, is we'll have a bit of a panel discussion, a dialogue about what Till and Sylvia just shared, and then we'll save some time at the end for questions. So please do sort of note any questions you have. Feel free to put them in the chat. If you'd like me to ask them, we'll hold off and we'll do sort of a hand raising thing in a bit, and you can ask them yourselves. So I want to start to the panel sort of at the inside, and Sam, here's my heads up. I'm going to come to you first. I think there were a couple of really interesting things that we just heard in that conversation, in that share out. One is this idea that the human timeline and the machine timeline are sort of fundamentally different. And I think when we often hear about the timeline for change, what what's possible, how people are internalizing and adapting and adopting these new tools, we tend to think about them, talk about them, and hear experts talk about them through the lens of how quickly the technology can do something, not how quickly humans are capable or willing to adapt to allow it to do something. So I think these sort of two new timelines is a really interesting component ingredient to a very simple question, which is, Sam, you work at Indeed. You lead global comms there. You not only have a perspective as a comms leader, but you also happen to have a really interesting, I think, perch onto the job market, how job listings are changing, how companies are thinking differently about hiring, how you're seeing perhaps even resumes in the aggregate evolve to represent some of this stuff. So what are you all seeing about kind of what's happening at that first stage of employee transformation? Who's getting hired into what kinds of roles to do what right now?
Sure. Okay. So just to give everybody a little bit of context on Indeed, just so you know where I'm pulling some upcoming stats from. So there are about 635 million job seeker profiles on Indeed. We help 3.3 million employers. So we're at this intersection point of helping match, of course, job seekers and employers, which is a very interesting place to be in this AI wave. And it's definitely a buckle up wave. So I will tell you that when we look at, I think it's about 27 million, somewhere around there, job listings right now on the platform. When we look at all those job listings, about 4.7 of those job listings include some sort of AI capability. So that could be something like the job listing includes, must have experience working with ChatGPT, for example. And so it's a very, very small amount. But if you go to what we call our hiring lab, you can go to hiringlab.org. And it's our research think tank that uses all of the insights that we have on our platform. And they're just constantly studying like this rate of change of how fast are we seeing employers actually change their behavior and what they're looking for from candidates. And if you look at the chart, it's just a hockey stick, but it is very much again in this buckle up stage where that is growing so fast and we are at the very early stages of seeing that change. When you dive into occupations, for example, let's just take this broad kind of industry of marketing that we sometimes sit in, sometimes don't as comm professionals. Beginning of January 2025, 8.4% of job listings had some sort of AI skill, AI qualification being asked. Then go to the end of 2025 in December, it was 14.9%. So we started the year 8.4, we ended in 14.9. Our industry is one of the most impacted, if you will, in terms of the demand for AI skills. I'd say the industry that is most is actually in more of like software development, software engineering. So perhaps not so surprising. So you're definitely seeing a big change. And even our own research, I think, is going to get more sophisticated because I think we're so much of a blunt hammer right now. We're like, what is your job? I do comms, or what is your job? I do software engineering. But I think when we're going to get more sophisticated, we're going to look more at the skills of every single occupation that we know today. And I think looking at the rate of change of those skills is really where we're going to find some interesting stuff. Because I think AI is not going to be a full-on job killer. It is going to be a job redesigner. So the jobs that we know and do today, yes, will look very different. Yes, some jobs will go away, but of course there will be entirely new jobs created. But by and large, I think that we're going to really look at a massive redesigning of what jobs are going to be out there.
It's so interesting if you spend any time in AI talk on TikTok, one of the things you see quite an extraordinary amount of content about are developers who are talking about the skills they are learning to differentiate themselves into their sort of marketplace of work, which is really complex right now. Lots of layoffs we see coming in the shape of developers. And one of the things I think that's sort of interesting, and I can only sort of share this anecdotally. I don't have a data point to back it up, but I've experienced it personally, is a lot of developers talking about bringing storytelling into their skill set because their belief is that they won't need to actually develop things. What they will need is to be able to convince others inside their organization to let the AI develop the things. And so it becomes about almost the sales process, the persuasion internally. Amanda, I want to take a second and ask you, you work with a lot of brands across sort of a lot of different sectors. Thinking about this transformation, this kind of adopting of new skills as a core part of the evolution or the transformation that comms functions are going on. Are there any things that you're seeing, any trends you're seeing, any examples that are really standing out of either things that you sort of expected to see are seeing and they're working, or perhaps things that have surprised you in that this, to Sam's point about these new skills and what's coming up?
Yeah, I feel like it's such an exciting time for PR people. I know a lot of us, were so excited when these headlines came out. I know the Wall Street Journal is one that, we talked about in the prep call where it's like storytellers are in. I'm just energized because this is the first time in my career that I've seen CCOs get the proper like budget and resources to the level that I know like a colleague of mine at a big bank where she's A/B testing different AI tools where I'm like, but comms never got budget for one tool, let alone we know this is so important, we're going to be duplicative. Um, so I feel like the skills that comms pros have is, we know the data and Muckrack has great data on this that 98% of the high value sources are earned media for AI. And understanding the earned media landscape and how to build reputation capital, that's like our superpower as PR people. So one example for a recent event where we had some media leaders on the panel that really was like an aha moment for me is like Inc. magazine, which I happen to contribute to as well, which I feel like that's a proof point that our skills as comms people are very transferable, like being a storyteller and understanding how to make, executives like mediagenic. So Tim Crino, senior editor at Inc. magazine, Inc. is behind a paywall, so they don't open up most of their content for AI scraping. The one anomaly is their Inc. 5000 list. So this is the 5,000 fastest growing businesses. It's a big franchise. For the first time last year, they did a press day for all 5,000 companies because they knew these were their superpowers. If these companies shared their content, it would just help with their overall, geo AI boost. But for the Inc. 5000, they actually partner with the LLMs and give them that information. And the LMs love it because if you're on the Inc. 5000, they checked your tax returns. So that's like very credible. So if you get on that list, it's like really good for boosting your company. So that was like an aha moment. And also, if you're part of their council, they have like a publisher's benefit, which a lot of companies don't take advantage of. But having that being able to publish is critical. I've worked with some clients recently where they'll have a story they really don't like, and it's been so interesting to talk to these geo experts where they're like, the reason that this Forbes story is keeps popping up is it has information about your business that doesn't exist anywhere else. So next time you're working on an earned story, is there a way we can get that information in, your next Bloomberg feature to kind of swap it out? So I feel like everybody realizes having we, I feel like we need a new term for earned media, but like reported stories is so critical. And PR people, we've been building those reputations and really understanding these different media outlets. And I feel like finally we have the data to manage up to the board and C-suite. I mean, I remember not so long ago in my career, I had a CEO and he really wanted to be in Barron's in print. And as PR people, we all know if it's like in print and this one, like maybe the people in your community are going to read it, but it's not going to be syndicated as much as a podcast that goes across different platforms. So I wish I could go back in time with this data and show that there certain outlets and there's data like Muckrack has data out there that like Investopedia, for example, for finance is the top 5 source on a lot of LLMs. So I think the skills is like no under like showing that you're a subject matter expert not only in AI but in earned media. And then this is I feel like when talking to my peers, this is that critical time to assert the fact that if there's a working group on AI, comms needs to be a leader in that because we have these special skills. So I feel like there's a lot of people who are really making sure that when that working group goes out, it's not just the SEO experts and the tech team, that the comms has a leadership role in that working group.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting point. Like this question of sort of how do we think about the skills required to make AI possible inside the organization, right? And I think you touch on it when you talk about things like storytelling, earned media, right? These are sort of core to us, but there are also some technical realities, right? If your content isn't available to be crawled, right, then there's an implication. If your channel mix of your from a strategic perspective, then you have an authority implication in how you're mentioned or not mentioned inside these LLMs as a brand is represented. Sam, I want to come back to you as thinking about your organization and the transformation sort of underway, right? Because as a CCO, one of the challenges you're facing day to day is how do you manage this? We need some new skills. We need to protect the sort of core skills that are important from a differentiation perspective. And here I'm talking about things like creativity, like relationship building, like, interpersonal trust, right? What are the areas, skill sets, focus that you are driving from a transformation perspective for your team, thinking about how they need to evolve and how they need to think differently as AI becomes more and more a part of what they do every day?
Yeah. Well, there's kind of three dimensions at Indeed that we think about this, right? And so I'll just give broad context how we organize and then maybe some of the skills specific to the team. So the way we've kind of structured our AI development is there's one as a company. So what are the tools, the guardrails that we have as a company? There is as a large like group organization that we're part of, like then more specific to our area of field, our goals. And then there's my team, right? And so then that's really diving down into, okay, we know the company stuff, we know our department, and then we know our team. And so just really thinking wisely about what are the tools that we want to tap into and what makes the most sense for us. I also think we're still very much in that kind of assist and share stage, right? Where we're kind of toggling between the two, where some of it is an aid and some of it's working alongside of us. And I think it's a lot of experimentation, but I think there's a lot of transparency. And so we're constantly like, I don't know if everybody remembers this phase when we entered the pandemic. And I swear every call I started on, it was like the first 5 to 10 minutes were Zoom tips. Like, how did you turn off your camera? How'd you do the blur in the background? Now it's like the AI tips, right? Like, oh, how did you use that? Oh my gosh. Like, how'd you do that photo? Um, and so we've actually like indoctrinated that into more of a purposeful thing. And actually, I used to do consulting for Chevron many years ago, and they took safety so important. And so they would start every single meeting with a safety moment. And so I just thought that such a good practice to just try and start to change some DNA and some behavior and kind of create that motion going there as well. Um, but it was really interesting, as I'm listening to Amanda and I resonate 100% with everything Amanda is saying. And I'm thinking, of course, yes, like you feel a little bit of a house on fire as you're trying new things, trying to figure out what works for your team, trying to figure out what's maybe time consuming versus time saving. But there are some very tried and true skills that I think are very, very important as we're going into this. And one is just more your intention on your storytelling. And because LLMs or whatever, even if you go to SEO and things like that, I feel like just being very conscious of what are the narratives that you're putting out there about your company and your business. And is that going to show up in the way that you want? If you've got 1,000 stories, how do you make sure that that really is complementary to the most important things that you're trying to do to help the world in whatever your purview of your business is? So I think that's the other piece alongside this is yes, there's been a lot of ways that we've been assisting and sharing in terms of the adoption of AI, but we've had to become a lot more focused, I think, with our intent to think about what is it that we're really trying to tell people and making sure that that really gets across. And then again, going back to the AI tools to being like, how is that actually showing up? Where are we weak on those things? And then that helps us go, oh my gosh, we're actually weak in this area. We should really lean in. How can we lean in? And then that's really where some of the creativity comes into play.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting because what part of what you're articulating is this sort of like virtuous loop, right? Wherein
Correct.
the
That's exactly
technology enables us to do something that maybe we couldn't before, or to do something better than we could before. The technology gives us insight into how we can improve it. And so we can sort of do that kind of virtuous loop, right? And it really does play out, I think, in the first two stages. I think as we start to think about the agency piece, right, when we get to that third layer, that third phase, wherein we have autonomous agents connected together doing things, I think one of the things that's most interesting, and I'm seeing a lot of clients talk about, we're talking with a lot of clients about this, is what you don't want is sort of a diminishment to the mean, right? You don't want every time you ask every AI to help you come up with creative campaign ideas about fill in the blank topic, for all of those ideas to sort of look the same. And so part of the challenge we have as we think about, I think, building these integrated chained agents, right? The things that can act autonomously from us as coworkers, is that we have to be able to also articulate, to protect, and to train those agents on how they do the things they do. So, in our example, they do them the Hotwire way. We believe this is the best way to do XYZ. We'd like you, AI agent, to help us improve that. But what we're not looking for is an amalgamation of every agency's best way they do something, because then our approach won't be distinctive and based on sort of us, our history, what we really know. And that sort of distinction between how you imagine what an AI can do, which is in and of itself sort of a creative problem solving challenge that each profession has to go on that journey of. And then think about, well, what is the best way to do it from our perspective for the people that we help do it for? And I think that sort of strategic orientation is something that a lot of organizations aren't spending much time thinking about. They're sort of jumping from one stage to the next. And one of the things that I really call everyone to think about is, are you really happy with the way you're training agents to do the things you're training them to do? Because once you say, okay, now go do these 12 things together and then bring me an output, unraveling that output, if it isn't what you need it to be, gets much more complicated. And so I think that's one of the big kind of early opportunities, and maybe is where we connect the internal transformation journey that most organizations are going to with the reality of what's going on outside, right? So let's talk a little bit about what's happening outside of the organization. We've seen, I think, a few really interesting trends. So the first, everybody's talking about AEO or GEO. We are certainly seeing zero-click search evolve in a really rapid and interesting way. We're seeing zero-click purchase, I think, increasingly happen and be more possible. If you watched it all, the Claude bot sort of emergence and then acquisition, you saw sort of everyday normal human beings really leaning into trying to build autonomous agents to act on their behalf. Now, if we take a step back and we think about what that really means, I've really taken to talking about it with clients in the following way. What it means is the answer engines are essentially now a new target audience. They speak a slightly different language than all your other audiences. They have slightly different sort of psychographic and demographic information. If you wanted to think about building personas about them, they gather content and information from other places. They are, in many respects, not that different than if we were to think about a specific target reporter in an earned media campaign or an individual influencer, right? They are complex and they have lots of component parts. And I think it helps to start to think about them that way, because then we stop thinking about them as a way that I execute something, and we start thinking about them as almost an ecosystem that feeds itself and informs other parts of the world you care about. So through that kind of frame up lens, Amanda, I'm really curious, as you're seeing, you spoke a little bit about this a minute ago, sort of how organizations are executing around things like Geo. Where else are you seeing organizations begin to act, right? So not just experiment, but sort of what we would in the tech world call in production, right? These are things they're doing properly, on purpose, repeatably. Where are you seeing that movement happen?
Yeah. So my favorite thing from the prep call, so I'm so excited you brought it up, is your framework of AI as an audience, because it made me think. I hosted a panel and we had the head of comms at Priceline speak at the panel, and before she had joined, they really didn't have a comms team. It was a lot of performance marketing. And then they realized people thought of the brand as like the 90s price line that was like a discount. And now they have like a whole new set. So one thing her team does, which I think is, she should almost like frame it as AI as an audience, is in their comms plan. They have a section that's like the AI audience and it's different key messages. So I feel like the way, if you did that, the way is to do a like benchmarking, even a peer analysis. I dropped a link. Profound has great research. They just showed that like LinkedIn is like ranking higher and higher, and they have a public tracker by cat industry. So if you're like a Fortune 50 company, you could see who's trending more in like banking and hospitality. So having those AI key messages and measuring them campaign over campaign to see if those key messages go into the AI search would be really helpful. Um, I the one thing that I feel like has flipped on its head, because I've as a consultant, I'm lucky to work with like big companies, but sometimes when I work with startups, the one thing I think they need to change their framework around is, I feel like a lot of times startups would pick a day. Like, let's say you're announcing today because you're going to be at South by Southwest. I had a client with $10 million in funding that got a big TechCrunch feature, which I feel like is impossible now to get a TechCrunch feature. And we pitched it like 6 months in advance and asked her, what's the best for you? Because these reporters now, many of them have multiple channels and how they promote their content, newsletters being a big one. So if you're stuck on a Tuesday, but their newsletter goes out on a Thursday, they might decline that opportunity. And it's over like something simple like logistics. So I feel like with the AI, like as an audience, what I would be curious about is when I was, worked at PayPal for 15 years, how we structured our comms team was by audience. So there was like the consumer team. I was typically on the investor team, which I loved because it was pretty block and tackle. You look at the earnings transcript or the investor day or the board letter. What did we commit to the street? And you do a comms plan around it. I wonder if some modern comms teams will have like a team that's just AI as an audience, which I think is pretty smart, because the reason I feel like I've been getting so much great reception from the comms community, and I feel like it's so great that Hotwire is doing this, is because learning AI is a full-time job, and comms pros, when you do your annual review, they're they're not serving the AIs or the reporters, they're serving your clients internally. So I feel like your job is full managing up to executives. And I've heard from a lot of comms people that it's at an all-time high because these executives know that data is out there. So they demand it and they want it in real time, and they don't um if you're sending them a PDF, they're like, why are you sending me a PDF? This is like dynamic data. I want like a dashboard. So I'd be curious if we have this call, when we have this panel again in a year, if there's going to be a lot of Fortune 10 companies who have an audience-based approach with AI as an audience. Because I feel like your the way you articulate that is makes it really easy to understand.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting because this sort of the cultural transformation, to your point, is both sort of revolutionary in that it forces us to think fundamentally differently about how we've thought of those relationships in the past, right? But also evolutionary in that it really is, in some respects, an underline, a bold face of the type on the importance of earned media relations. You talked a little bit about measurement, so I'm going to go off script for just a second and say I'm gonna call on you because I just have a question and I know that you're going to have something interesting about this. How is AI changing how you're measuring the performance of the function so far? Are you thinking differently about different KPIs or sort of different things that will give you that clue, that indication, like this is working, we're going to keep doing this, or this isn't? I think this measurement question is something a lot of clients are really, really struggling with.
Well, I'm going to lower the bar just on the expectations to this question, but I'm going to say the answer to your question is a no and a yes. So are we changing our KPIs in general? No, like we try to have a very focused North Star metric. And so we think a lot about the power of voice. I still think that this is part of our equation of how we tell our story. So, yes, it is an important rising channel or source of how we think, but there are many things that build our reputation. And so, until AI is like the only thing, we're going to look at everything, right, that builds up our reputation. And so that's why we look at a power of voice score. And so that's really looking at like the quality of the message and that narrative that we're trying to get out there and how high quality it is when it shows up. But that, so the yes part of my answer is yes, of course, we're looking at how we're showing up in different LLMs and what's resonating. I will tell you that I think always one of my best friends, if you will, in the organization prior to LLMs and AI, or the formality of where we are in AI today, was the SEO person. And because I will never be a full-time job person on whether it's SEO or GEO, but I am going to be very, very smart on it as a comms professional. And so I think there's also just a lot of partnerships in the company that are changing and evolving that are important for me to do my job. And that ongoing, kind of constant sharing relationship is incredibly helpful as I'm thinking about here are the narratives that I need to get out. What are the best ways for me to get them out? And of course, in this kind of AI LLM world, it is just so dynamic. Like we can't predict how the conversation flow will go for every single user. We probably know some of the prime questions or topics that are going to come up, and that is good for us. So we try and think kind of a two-way street when it comes to LLMs. We think about what are the narratives that we want to get out there and how are we going to use these platforms to get that message out there? And then what is going to be most asked about us, and can we get that information out in a different way than we already are today?
Yeah, I love that in part because without realizing it, you actually raised the bar. Because I think what is wrapped up in what you said is organizations that have spent time thinking about the outcome they're trying to drive, the end result, the ultimate intention of their work don't actually have to change an extraordinary amount about how they measure because they're still measuring for the same ultimate outcome. So you have a point of view about how your voice impacts the performance of the business, and that's therefore what you measure.
Yeah.
I
And
think
that actually is where what I really want to emphasize is just on measurement in general. That is actually what I am hunting and chasing for my entire career is how do I look at the KPIs that we have and actually looking at company performance and finding some association there. I'm also part of our parent company, Recruit Holdings, a publicly traded company. I'm looking at our stock value and like how does that change over time and how does reputation feed in? So I will just put out there if other people have cracked that, I would love to talk to you because that is a messy, interesting place. But I would, yeah, it's an interesting space. And I think finding that correlation. So when your CEO says, what's the ROI of this? You've got something really meaty.
And I think it will become even more important, right, as we think about the agentic flow. Because at the end of the day, part of what we're trying to do, part of what this whole piece of research that House Beautiful Business has helped put together, has led to put together, is this idea that ultimately multiple steps in a combined workflow will be able to be executed without human intervention. If all of your measurement if all of your indication of performance is based on the outputs of each step of that autonomous chain, then all of the things you're measuring will actually give you no indication about whether you're performing well or not. Because volume is no longer the limiter, right? That used to be you have enough people to do a certain number of things, you could measure that and call that a proxy. That won't be true anymore. And so this really sharpening our pencil on what it is we're trying to achieve, what are the ways that we can achieve that? And I do think the question of ROI is one we're going to be around here trying to answer for a long time. But there are lots of ways to get close. There are lots of proxies that are very specific to an individual institution or organization and what it's trying to do. And I think that's really, really interesting. So we've got 9 minutes or so. We've got a little bit of time for questions in the room. If anybody wants to raise their hand or pop something in the chat, I'm seeing some comments, loving those. No questions so
Or
far.
even opening the mic. They can open the mic if someone wants to ask a
Yes.
question.
And I love how Christina from Mercedes dropped a joke, and we were on the board of communications week together, and we just had a board call, and she made a really good point that like everyone went silent, where she's like, "You guys remember this conference is in November. AI is going to be in a whole different place, so I feel like you have to think far ahead." And then Samantha, one thing I loved about you thinking about like the investor audience is I've worked on two activist investor projects, and basically what I've learned from that is investors like consistency. So I feel like there's like there could be certain soft spots in the business. Maybe it's like leadership changes or, OpEx, and you could show how you're like positioning the brand with reputation capital that it's more consistent. I haven't thought of it from that lens before of um, measuring like by AI, by audience, especially the investor audience, because they're so particular.
Yeah.
Any questions, comments, thoughts?
I've got one more if no one else does. And Dan, I see your hand. Go for
Yeah.
it, sir.
Hi, how's it going? Yeah, I agree with that, everything everybody said, and there's some great data points here. And one of the interesting things that I've talked to executives at a previous role and just conversations I'm having with people, this is such an overwhelming topic. And, you can tell people and tell stakeholders and execs all day long that GEO is driving exposure, but not necessarily direct traffic and, all these other ways to understand it right now. But in this new realm where we're, even from comms and, SEO teams kind of sort of fusing together, it's really getting your head around this thing that is diverting away from the axiom of the last decade, which is like optimized conversations and exposure and media for keywords, because then that'll directly, the comms work will get directly into SEO, which will translate into visibility and then ideally sales and market share and so on. But now, like with AI, it's really like, it's reflexively coming back to the human element, which is like you're now optimizing for conversations because that's how search is going to surface all this storytelling. It's not, X near me. It's somebody going to an LLM, and soon the agents will be, it won't be the human going to the LLM talking to something. It will be somebody orchestrating agents that will then go into the LLMs and have these particular ways of searching for things. So, I don't know. I'd love everybody's or just anybody's thoughts of where the value right now is on, or is or isn't on really becoming the expert for your firm in not only like GEO and how these different platforms are working, but really becoming the expert in how to translate what all this is to these stakeholders that simply don't have the time to even barely catch up. I'm sure people have seen this graph that's going around on LinkedIn where, it was like the big square of where AI is just one thin little line of anybody using these tools. And then an infinitesimal little dot is of the people that are using these paid tools to actually force multiply what they're doing in comms, in anything regarding AI. But I really feel like the bleeding edge is really this world of storytelling, of comms, and how it's interacting and reshaping how we all work within different levels of different organizations.
I'd love to jump in on this. Actually, I think you brought up just such another interesting point. Everything I think we've covered so far is very like optimistic, and it's like a big white space for us to kind of go play in and learn new things. I think I'd be remiss not to bring up the kind of fear factor aspect of this too, right? Like my entire communication strategy is built on one key element, and that's trust. And I say the other key relationship that I have in the organization that I am best friends with is our CIO, CSO, because I'm like, tell me every worst nightmare that you can think of as you think of this growing space and area. And if like, sure, I want to go out there and tell all these narratives to the world, but I need people to trust them and trust that they're coming from this authentic, credible space. And so a lot of our work, if you look at the Indeed newsroom, for example, like we're putting post after post out there on just areas that touch on trust so that people can navigate this new world of agents. And I think there's a lot to be gained even just in the adoption of agents as well, or just anything that's autonomous. I mean, I'm sure a lot of you have maybe seen Waymo cars that are driverless, right? Like we all had to get a little bit used to that. Now imagine going on an airplane that was pilotless. Like that's a little scary, And so I think there's these varying places and spaces that as humans we are trying to get comfortable with, and there's just in our own worlds of work, I think we cannot forget the trust element because we cannot take advantage of this kind of new exciting area to tell our stories and to get those stories out without being incredibly active, in essence on the defense front, to help people either feel comfortable with the technology or help them see through when there might be a risk or issue, because that's out there as well.
I want to just quickly weigh in on this, Samantha, because this is interesting, of course, and totally true. But of course, another way to articulate that trust idea that you just said is also the idea of the ongoing effort of any brand and organization trying to control the message of what's out there, which got lost, of course, more and more, as we all know, through social media coming into the mix. And I think Dan, what you said about the switch towards more conversational experience of stories and news and anything. I mean, also my teenage son. I mean, the only way how he consumes any kind of information is essentially through conversation styles on TikTok, ultimately. And I think this is such a paradigm shift coming up for us that of course with like at some point losing maybe the screen as the central element, how that interaction happens, and indeed moving more towards voice. It's really hard to imagine that. And I mean maybe the 10,000 level foot view on this is like, I mean, we're scrambling trying to catch up, but we're really I think in for something that no one ultimately at this point can predict how to control. And I think that's just reality to deal with.
I think the other thing, which maybe I'll take this as an opportunity to wrap us up and say a quick thanks. I think the other thing that's rooted in the comment that all of you made, Dan, Sam, and Till, is whether you want to call it trust or confidence or reputation or net promoter, it almost doesn't matter. What we're describing is a certain kind of emotional reality, which is that when you tell me something, I believe that the thing that you've told me is true. And for humans, trust is built on a series of a combination of a lot of things, right? Psychologically, it's built on some fact establishment. It's built on emotional connection. It's built on sort of all kinds of things, chemistry, charisma, et cetera, right? And we've spent the last 30 years working on how to translate, how to make a brand feel trusted, emotionally trustable by a human. Part of what's happening is that trust connection, that reputation connection, is going to be disintermediated or broken by agents. And agents don't build trust the same way humans do, which means the way brands are trying to secure trust with agents is going to require a different paradigm. And perhaps more importantly, the way brands attempt to build trust with end user humans when a robot is in the middle of that value exchange is really, really an interesting challenge or problem. How will you know if you have the trust of the answer engine? And if you do have the trust of the answer engine, how will you ensure that that translates to trust of the end user who's interacting with that LLM or that AI? And to your point, I think, Amanda, you sort of hinted at this when we think about conferences we're planning for the fall. We have no idea even what the form factor of many of these things is going to take by the time we're talking about the fall, right? A screenless ecosystem is not altogether an impossibility, even in the short term. So I think what we're talking about here is really such a fascinating moment in time wherein so much of what we're doing is changing. There are a lot of points of view about what's right. I think a lot of things to learn about steps to take, but the practical reality here is we're very much still in a bit of a wild west where innovation and creativity and problem solving and experimentation attached to real measurement is going to be the way each enterprise figures out what works for them, what doesn't, what they want to double down on, and where they want to spend their energy, time, and investment. I just want to say a really big thank you to Till and Sylvia, for all the folks at Hotwire for organizing this and putting it on. Sam and Amanda, thank you so much for joining us. This was fantastic. I hope everyone enjoyed it. We'll be doing many more of these over the course of time on a lot of topics related to AI, innovation, technology, and storytelling, and how every enterprise increasingly is having to tell a successful innovation and technology story to thrive in the marketplace. And that's a big challenge for a lot of them. So we'll be spending a lot of time talking about that. Thank you all so much. Have a fantastic rest of your Tuesday, and hope we'll see you again soon.
Thank you. Thank you all.